Okay, welcome to another episode of Thoughts and Bolts. I'm your host, Pedro Laveria, and today we are going over, once again, the LEAP Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies 10-month report. This was a document which was part of the AAWSAP program, which was a Pentagon UFO program from the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency. Okay. And this series, it's really fun to make. I want to explain kind of my approach more before I get into the details. It's not enough just to have a leaked document and read it and say, "Ooh, look at what it says." You have to read things in their historical context, right? So take the US Constitution, for example. Okay. If you really want to understand what the founders meant when they wrote the Constitution. Okay. Not what you want it to mean, but what it actually meant the time that the ink was still wet, right? Once that feather pen got off the parchment. Um, what do? You just don't read it from your house on your tablet in 2025, right? You have to read other texts that they wrote at the same time, and you even have to read what other people wrote at that same time and place. And you may even go a step in the past to see what people were writing before them. And you may even go a little bit ahead in the future to see how people reacted to what was written, right? So if you wanted to understand the US Constitution as it was originally meant to be understood by the authors, okay, not to say that that's how we should read it today. This isn't a political post. But if you really want to understand what it means, you have to read the Federalist Papers, right? The little debates they were having in print, right? You have to read John Locke, Robespierre, Montesquieu, right? You have to read, um, you might even have to study the French Revolution, which happened, a generation later, right? All these different things will give you the context you need to understand what the Constitution means, right? In its original context. Same thing goes with, let's say, scripture. Okay, biblical scholars, at secular institutions using secular methodologies who just read the Bible as a book of ancient literature, okay, which it is, it's ancient literature. To understand what the author meant when they wrote, they use this contextual approach. Okay. So if you take, for example, John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, right? Well, what did the author mean at that time? Not what do you mean when you read it, or what your pastor says it means, or what some council 400 years after the fact says it means, but what did the actual writer, when he was writing on that lambskin or papyrus, what did he mean when he wrote that? Well, look, scholars say, well, that you can tell based on the content that the author was a Jew, right? He was a Christian Jew. And you can tell, well, obviously the documents are written in Greek. So what other Jewish, writers from the first century were writing in Greek? Philo of Alexandria. Oh, he wrote about the logos. Oh, John 1:1 is talking about the logos. Okay, so maybe if you read Philo of Alexandria, right, this Jewish rabbi in Alexandria, Egypt, who was a Platonist, um, if you read what Philo of Alexandria says about the logos, okay, then maybe you'll get a closer understanding of what the author of John meant when he talked about the logos. You'll get a better understanding of taking that historical approach by seeing what other Hellenized Jews, okay, Greek speaking, Greek writing Jews were saying at that time about the logos, than you would, reading what someone else 400 years later, or 2000 years later, meant by the logos. Okay, that's what the approach we're taking to these documents. Okay, now, without further ado, I really think with regards to crash retrievals and the tech transfer of non-human intelligence tech from Lockheed Martin to Bigelow Aerospace under the AAWSAP program, right? This part of the report is actually like the most important, right? So in the last episode, we talked about David Grush. He explicitly described this, and how put off implicitly described this fact, right? That Lockheed Martin has recovered hardware of non-human intelligence, and they wanted to transfer that to Bigelow Aerospace under this OSAP program. And here you have in plain English the need for a highly secure underground vault operated by Boss became apparent in line with a Boss priority to pursue and acquire recovered hardware and biological samples from the corporate world. Okay. Corporate world, that's Lockheed Martin. Okay. Recovered hardware, that's whatever craft they have or wreckage they have from the 1950s. Okay. And that tech transfer was blocked by the CIA. But again, Grush and Putoff give us the context. And, I started this little presentation with a picture of Harry Reid and good old Senator Harry Reid, my Mormon brother. It's going to give us the added context. Okay. This is from the New Yorker. This is the interview that the article that David Grush cited on Rogan. Okay. The author says, when I asked Reid about the confusion, he told me that he admired Keene, but that he had never seen proof of any remnants, something Keene had never actually claimed. He left no doubt in our conversation as to his personal assessment. I was told for decades that Lockheed has some of these retrieved materials, he said. And I tried to get, as I recall, a classified approval by the Pentagon to have me go look at the stuff. They would not approve that. I don't know what all the numbers were, what kind of classification it was, but they would not give that to me. He told me that the Pentagon had not provided a reason. I asked if that was why he'd requested SAP status for ATIP. Okay, SAP is Special Access Program. ATIP was one of the nicknames for OSAP. So, and this is why it's messy. The term ATIP and the term OSAP, one point was interchangeable. Then those terms were interchangeable when they shouldn't have been, and now it's kind of muddy. But ATIP is awesome. Okay. He said, quote, yeah, that's why I wanted them to take a look at it. They wouldn't give me the clearance. A representative of Lockheed Martin declined to comment for this article. Okay. So there you go. Okay. From Senator Reid. And that adds context to what I'm going to get into now. Okay. Jim Lukatsky, who was the director of OSAP, and Colin Kelleher was the operations manager, wrote this book. And what I really love about this book is that they tell you about UFOs and then they tell you about the defense intelligence reference documents you can read to understand what they just told you about UFOs. Okay. So this is what they said. And remember, this had to go through the Office of Pre-Publication Security Review. Okay. So it's a sanitized narrative, right? They can't tell you everything, but I think we have enough from the last video and this Harry Reid interview to fill in the blanks. Okay. Quote, at the conclusion of a 2011 meeting in the Capitol building with a U.S. Senator, Harry Reid. Okay. I'm adding that in. Harry Reid. And an agency undersecretary, Lukatsky, the only one of this book's authors present, posed a question. He stated that the United States was in possession of a craft of unknown origin and had successfully gained access to it. Had successfully gained access to its interior. This craft had a streamlined configuration suitable for aerodynamic flight, but no intakes, exhaust, wings, or control surfaces. In fact, it appeared not to have an engine, fuel tanks, or fuel. Lakatsky asks, what was the purpose of this craft? Was it a life support craft useful only for atmospheric reentry, or what? If it was a spacecraft, then how did it operate? And then they tell us, the book's authors, look, if you want to understand how these things fly or how they might fly, look at the negative mass propulsion dirt and the um, space-time metric engineering dirt. Okay, so that's all they're allowed to tell us, right? Lukatsky talked to a senator, almost certainly Harry Reid. Okay, um, and he posed the question. What was the question? They don't tell us what the question was, but the answer to that question was that yes, the United States was in possession of a craft of unknown origin and had gained entrance to the interior. Okay. It was aerodynamic, but it didn't have intakes, exhaust, wings, or control surfaces. Okay. It had no fuel tanks or an engine, fuel. Okay. Now, what's really interesting about this is that look at the title of the book, Inside the U.S. Government Covert UFO Program. Subtitle, Initial Revelations. Now, these aren't initial revelations. This book is part two in a series. This is the second book in a series. The first book was Skinwalkers in the Pentagon. The sequel is called, subtitled, Initial Revelations. Okay. That's a contradiction. And that's the kind of thing you have to pay attention to. Now, I'm not the one who discovered it. Someone on UFO Twitter figured this out first. I forgot who it is, whoever you are, I'm sorry. But the term initial revelations appears one time and only one time in the following book, The Day After Roswell by Colonel Philip J. Corso. And it just so happens that that term appears in the very section in which Corso describes in detail the Roswell craft and how it flew and the technology that was used to control it. Okay? And this description is similar to the description, the very sanitized description that Lukatsky, Kelleher, and Knapp give us in chapter 9 of Initial Revelations. That is not a coincidence. Okay? Now, Philip Corso, if you don't know, he was a colonel in the army, and he wrote this book called The Day After Roswell, which he claims that some of the handheld technology, the stuff you could actually hold with your hands from the Roswell crash was given to him, and that it was his task to give it to private industry so that they could reverse engineer it. Okay. Uh, you'd be the judge. Okay. But this is not a coincidence that um, the subtitle of this book is called Initial Revelations, and that term is found only once in this book, and again, in describing how a craft flies, the Roswell craft, and this description is similar to the description you see here. So let's read. The initial revelations into the nature of the spacecraft and its pilot interface came very quickly during the first few years of testing at Norton. The Air Force discovered that the entire vehicle functioned just like a giant capacitor. In other words, the craft itself stored the energy necessary to propagate the magnetic field that elevated it, allowed it to achieve escape velocity from the Earth's gravity, and enabled it to achieve speeds of over 7,000 miles per hour. The pilots weren't affected by the tremendous G-forces that build up in the acceleration of conventional aircraft because to aliens inside, it was as if gravity was being folded around the outside of the wave that enveloped craft. Maybe it was like traveling inside the eye of a hurricane. But how did the pilots interface with the waveform they were generating? I reported to General Trudeau that the secret to this system can be found in the single-piece skin-tight coveralls spun around the creatures. The lengthwise atomic alignment of the strange fabric was a clue to me that somehow the pilots became part of the electrical storage and generation of the craft itself. They didn't just pilot or navigate the vehicle, They became part of the electrical circuitry of the vehicle, vectoring it in a way similar to the way you order a voluntary muscle to move. The vehicle was simply an extension of their own bodies because it was tied into their neurological systems in ways that even today we are just beginning to utilize. So the creatures were able to survive extended periods living inside a high energy wave by becoming the primary circuit in the control of the wave. They were protected by their suits, which enclosed them head to feet, but their suits enabled them to become one with the vehicle, literally part of the wave. In 1947, this was a technology so new to us that it was as frightening as it was frustrating. Okay. Now, mind you, Corso wrote this in the 90s. Okay, so it's more than 40 years after the fact. Um, but it is before all this AAWSAP stuff was going down. And I think now you know why. Not only did AAWSAP just these two DIRTs, right? The negative mass propulsion and advanced space propulsion based on vacuum engineering DIRTs, which again, Lakatsky, Kelleher, and Knapp mention in connection with Lockheed craft. But now you also know why AAWSAP produced these two DIRTs. The technological approaches to controlling external devices in the absence of limb-operated interfaces, which in pop culture talk would be Neuralink, okay? Controlling technology with your mind, okay? That's what that is. How to control technology with your mind. We've all seen the Neuralink guy with the chip in his brain. God bless Elon Musk, right? And now he can play video games using his mind. Okay. Now you know why ASAP wrote this bird. And now you also know why ASAP wrote the other dirt, concepts for extracting energy from the quantum vacuum. Now you know why it wrote that dirt as well. Okay. In pop culture terms, we call that 0 point energy, right? Why are they writing dirts on 0 point energy? Okay. Again, because this craft or the wreckage that Lockheed has, this craft, whatever it is, has no intakes or exhausts. It has no engine or fuel tanks or fuel. So it's probably extracting energy from quantum vacuum. Okay. And as the authors kind of hint us, they tell us to read Corso in a very kind of cryptic way. The pilots of the Roswell crash, okay, were using some kind of technology, some kind of technological approach to controlling external devices in the absence of limb-operated interfaces. Okay, so they weren't controlling the thing with joysticks and levers and wheels. They were controlling it somehow with their mind, as Corso described in the 1990s. Okay, so that's it for this episode. If you want to kind of review it, pause at the text I uploaded, please do. But as I always tell you, learn to pray, learn to meditate, and you'll understand more about the UFO phenomenon by doing that than in any other way. Good night.